Everybody, good morning. Good morning. Oh, come on. It's day 3 of Dreamforce. How bad could it possibly be? Good morning. Good morning. Awesome. How you guys doing? My name is Mark Ross, and I'm here to speak to you about amplifying your user experience with Lightning and Flow. First off, of course, before we get going, clicker, no clicky. Okay, we'll go without. Of course, the forward-looking statement, you've seen this a million times already, but we still have to tell you, please don't make any purchasing decisions about anything that you see here, because we're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff that is basically just me and not Salesforce talking, and who knows what else we'll talk about. Oh, I could do without. Okay. Oh, was this the power? I didn't have it on. Okay. It's day 3. I am Mark Ross. I'm the Salesforce Practice Director for Claris Group, a Salesforce implementation partner based in Kansas City. And if you have any questions about anything you see here, of course, you can find me in the session in the Dreamforce webpage. We can ask questions. You can ask questions there. Of course, you can also reach me here. That's my email address, my Twitter handle. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. All right, so real quick, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to have a real quick primer on what is Flow for anybody who might not know just yet. We're going to talk a little bit about the Lightning runtime and why that's really important. Then we're going to talk about embedding Flow in Lightning. Then we're going to talk about embedding Lightning in Flow. And then at the end, we'll have time for some questions. All right, so what is Flow exactly? In case you don't know. Well, it's a little bit like, if anybody's worked with Visio flowcharts, right? It is essentially a flowchart that you make for a process in Salesforce, but it actually does things, right? It doesn't just sit there looking pretty. It actually lets you run queries, goes to get data, updates data, creates new data, can do advanced logic decisions, and moving data around, shuttling data around, can even access external systems if you know what you're doing with that. It can be very, very, very useful because it can accomplish so much more automation than you normally would be able to accomplish with other things. And you may be thinking, well, okay, but that sounds a bit like Process Builder, right? The difference, one of the main differences, though, is that Flow has this layer to it. This is the visual layer. This is called a screen. Flow used to be called Visual Workflow because it had this visual layer. And what it is it presents your users with an actual screen where they can enter information, possibly even be presented with information, and then based on what they enter, you can actually do different things based on their input. So if in a pick list they actually choose A, then you could say, all right, go make a task. If they choose B, no, we're not going to make a task, we're going to go make an opportunity instead. All this kind of branching logic can be based on their input, right? Now, that is, well, not pretty, is it? It's a little bit cluttered, kind of hard to read, see which labels go with which fields. It's not very 2000 now, is it? It certainly doesn't look like Lightning. So this is where the Lightning runtime comes in, because the Lightning runtime is something that everyone here can turn on in each of your orgs, even if you are not on Lightning. You can still turn this on to make your flows turn from this to that. Ooh. Ah. So much nicer. It's legible, it's spaced well, and it looks like Lightning. It looks modern, right? So, like I said, everybody can turn this on now. And there are very few circumstances in which you would have to have any sort of consideration for not turning it on. Right? The only time you're ever going to be worried about turning it on is if you have some really advanced setup where you're embedding flows into Visualforce pages, which then have their own CSS, which is overriding the flow CSS. Okay, that's the one case where you might want to have some work done before you go and do this. But other than that, there's no downside, right? All it does is make stuff look better, plus it enables some of the things we're going to talk about today, even if you're still on Classic. Not everything. You're still going to want Lightning for the full experience, but it'll at least give you something. So how do we turn on the Lightning runtime? Well, on this screen right here, you can search in Setup for Process Automation Settings. And once you have found that and gone to that, it's this checkbox right here. That is what you must check. Turn that on, and voila, that's it. That's all you got to do. And now your flows will look pretty. Right? So that's the Lightning runtime. Let's actually talk about what it's going to take to put flow into your Lightning orgs, right? If you have Lightning enabled, you can now have Lightning pages, right? You have your page layouts and you have your Lightning pages. Everything is structured and visible to your people based on that. Well, now in Lightning, we have this ability. See up there on the top left? Well, this looks like a normal record page, more or less. We have the header up at the top. We have your activities on the right side. But then smack dab in the middle of everything is a flow screen. It is asking for user input right there and then, right? You know, they click a tab and they can see their details or their related lists. It's all there, right there for the user to use and see. You can present them with information. Maybe it's cross-object. You know, you can show them things from other places while they're looking at the account, or you can just ask them for input and do some automation right there and then. And best of all, it doesn't take any code to set up whatsoever, right? All you have to do, everybody worked with, most people worked with the Lightning page builder, right? Yeah, where you're dragging and dropping blocks onto the screen. All you do is drag and drop the block called flow, and then you choose the flow that you want to show on the screen. And that's it. It's pretty simple. So let's actually take a look at this in action. Here we have a contact, Mr. Andy Young. And over on the right side, look, there we go. We have a flow. It is a quick opportunity screen. All this is doing is saying, okay, give me your basic information, opportunity name, close date, amount, type, do we want to make a product? And then after they put in the information and click finish, boom, it goes and creates that opportunity without them having to leave the contact page, right? What this flow will do is actually goes and creates the opportunity. If they choose create a product, it will actually guide them on which product to add. And it can create the opportunity product at the same time. Right? So you don't have to go clicking around. The salespeople don't have to go clicking around, right? Think of the time and frustration this saves them from all the navigation they have to do. It may not seem like a lot as admins, but believe me, your sales team, your support teams will love you for it. Anything you can do to reduce even 2 clicks will make their day so much better. So let's take a look at our next example. All right, so another use case. I'm going to throw a lot of use cases at you today. I'm hoping that maybe some of them inspire you. Even if you don't use them, maybe they spark the brain into things that, oh, I could do something like that in my org. My people have been asking for something like this. So hopefully some of these will knock some neurons together. This is an opportunity, and let's face it, sometimes sales managers, support managers, various managers, they like to know exactly what their people are doing at any given time, right? Sometimes they want to know, okay, well, what are they actually going to do? What are they looking at? There's no place in Salesforce that we have right now where you can actually track what pages individual people are looking at. If you have event monitoring, you can do something similar, but it's not the full, it doesn't give you all of that, right? And it's fairly complicated to set up. So how do we actually be able to, how can we tell our sales managers or our managers in general like what people are doing, what they're visiting? So here's what I'm going to do. Here's a use case. They want to see wherever they are going to look at the notes on an opportunity. Are they actually using the notes or not? What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on notes, and as soon as I do, a flow is going to run. Boom. Did you see it? No, you didn't. But I appreciate the enthusiasm. Let's take a look at this page. So going in, voila, there it is. There is a flow that is embedded right there on that notes page. It ran, but it didn't run until I clicked on notes. And the reason you don't see it is because it does have a screen. You have to have a screen on your flow in order for it to be embedded in a page, but the screen has nothing on it. So the flow just doesn't render at all. It doesn't even show a white bounding box. It's just nothing, right? So now that flow ran. And what did that flow do? It created a view log entry. This is a custom object I have created. Let's take a look. There we go. Sure enough, 9:27, 9:39 a.m. just now, when I went to go look at that, it ran it. It took a log of what the ID was of the opportunity that I was on at the time. It recorded it, and who did it, and what the time was. So now I have a timestamp of each and every time somebody goes to look at a certain area in Salesforce. Say? Audit trail will only show you metadata changes. It doesn't show you actual page views. So this is how you get that page view log. All right. And my note's closed. Okay, here we go. Another example. Here's an opportunity. Let's say we have a process where they cannot proceed past a certain stage until they have opportunity, or until it's been approved by somebody, right? Well, right now we have this. This is the stage it's at. It's at perception analysis, and we can see here is a flow that's running, and it says your next steps have not been filled in. What if we're not even at this stage yet? What if we're still at the stage before, this ID decision makers? It disappeared, right? Because they didn't need it. This is one of the features that we have in Lightning is dynamic component, right? We have control. So you can actually make your flows visible when they get to the point where they're needed and hide them when they're not. That way you're not making more scrolling for the users to do because they hate that. But now that we're on our perception analysis, it's saying, okay, well, we don't have this opportunity, or we don't have this approval yet. And notice there is no button for submit for approval anywhere. There's a validation rule in place also that says that they're not going to be able to go to the next stage until they get this approval. What I'm doing is I am forcing them to go through my flow. The flow is checking for the next steps. Next steps is not filled in. It will not let them submit for approval. Of course, we have this in approvals right now. It's called your filter criteria, your entry criteria. But the main problem with entry criteria is that nobody knows what it is until they actually try to click the button. They click the button and it doesn't do anything, and they don't know why. Because there's no error, there's no nothing, validation rules don't run when you click that button. So what this does is it actually says to the user, before they even have a chance to get it wrong, hey, by the way, you need to do this. And it doesn't even give them a chance to get it wrong, right? They don't even have a submit for approval button. Once I actually put in the next steps, can't type. Close enough. Now we hit refresh. There we go. Now it says your opportunity is ready for approval. It was able to run. The flow ran at the time the page was loaded, saw there was next steps, and says, okay, now we have a next button. When you click the next button, the flow runs and pushes it to approval immediately. All right. So, next, putting flow into a tab, right? It is possible to actually set up a tab. It is a dedicated tab. All it has in it is flow. It doesn't have to be a record. It doesn't have to be an object. It's just here is a flow. We want you to run it. We want you to put things in it or look at it. Now, how do we do this exactly? Because before, we had to do Visualforce, right? Because before in Classic, the only way we could do this is make a tab, attach a Visualforce page to it, and then embed the flow in the Visualforce page. And if you don't know how to write Visualforce, kind of SOL. Now we don't have to do that. You can go to Lightning App Builder, not App Manager. That's different. Lots of different types of apps in Salesforce. Once you've clicked on New, then you select App Page. Not Home Page. It's not Home, not a record page, because it doesn't belong to an object. Once you've actually made the page and click Activate, then you can choose which of the apps, and by app this time I mean collection of tabs across the top of the page, not the one we were just talking about. You can choose which of those apps you want it to belong to. Just add that in and go. Now, of course, we get one more thing. And that is because we can make our own dedicated tabs, those tabs can then become mobile menu items. So now we have the ability to run a flow in mobile by doing so from this create a tab. Right? All you have to do, it'll ask you, just do you want to do this in mobile as well? So let's take a look at what this looks like. Here we go. Actually, let me go back one. I have a dedicated tab right here up at the top. It's called Time Clock. If I click on that, here we go. On the left side, there's a flow. It's running. It says, please click here to log in. On the right side, I have a list view. This list view is looking at the time logs object. It's a custom object that I have made, designed to keep track of people clocking in and clocking out for the day. All I have to do is go to Time Clock and then click on Next to clock in. And voila, it says you've successfully clocked in. I'm going to refresh the page. And now on the time logs list view, there it is. There is that time log that got created for that time, for me. I'm there. Notice it doesn't have a clock out because I haven't clocked out, but let's say I work a few hours, now I'm ready for lunch. And I'm going to clock out so I can go do that. I can go elsewhere. I can navigate to all sorts of crazy places. Come back. It's looking for that record. The flow is looking for that record, that recent time clock entry that does not have a clock out, and says, oh, this exists, therefore he is still clocked in. So now click next to clock out. We do so. We refresh the page. And voila, there it is with our time out as well. And you can do this from the mobile. Here's my little mobile emulator right here. Over on the left side, there's my little menu. I can touch on time clock. And there we go. It's exactly the same thing, isn't it? I can still press the next button, and it works just the same. Flow running in mobile. Of course, you may not want people clocking in from their phones. They might be doing so out in the parking lot, but it's a concept. All right. Next, we have actions. If you're not familiar, actions are similar to buttons and links. In fact, when you're actually setting up in Classic, where you will find how to create actions is under buttons, links, and actions. They're all grouped together. And you can see up at the top, we have this that says find account. That is actually an action. It is not a button. It is an action. It just looks like a button because it runs like a button, but what you're doing is you're actually putting a flow behind it. It is basically a button that calls a flow, but this is the new Lightning way of doing it. When you are creating one of these, you can go under whatever object you want to buttons, links, and actions. Click New Action, and then when you're doing so, you select the flow type, and then you just have to put in the flow. You just select the flow from your list, whichever one is going to be run by the button. Now, big warning. When you are making these, it is not possible to manually set your flow input variables. Okay? You cannot set those. However, you can set record ID, and that is case sensitive. All lowercase except the I. Has to be case sensitive or your system will not recognize it. When you make a variable in your flow called record ID, the system will automatically recognize that when it runs as an action, that this is the input variable coming from the record I'm running this from. And from there, you can usually run any other query you need based on that record ID once you have that ID. But that is the way to do it. It's not very well documented, so please be aware that that is a real thing. All right, so let's take a look at this in action. Here we have an account, and sure enough, up here at the top, here's a button. Man, that looks like a familiar name, Quick Op. That was the same thing we were looking at before. If I click on that, what it does is it pops this up in a modal. A modal is when you have a pop-up window, but it doesn't open it up in a new window or a new tab. It's just grays out everything in the background and puts something up on top. You'll hear that a lot in your development careers. That's a modal is what that's called. And notice what it's doing is it's filling in some of the information for us already. We already did some of this, right? You've seen some of this before, but notice what it's doing. It's filling in the account name and it's filling in the close date with some math being done. That is today's date. Well, we could do math if we wanted. But here's my point. How many of you have created URL hack buttons? Oh, that's a lot of people. How many of you created a URL hack button where you were referencing the new record page and then passing in field labels to put in predefined values? Yes, okay. Can't do that in Lightning, right? This is how we do it in Lightning, okay? Because what you can do now, run your button, you're calling the record ID, and in the flow, you can then run whatever queries you want to get those predefined field values. You can run against the running user, run against your record ID. You can do math. So if you need to do close date or today's date plus 30, you can do all of that in the flow prior to showing the screen. And then when you run the screen, you put those calculated variables in as default values on your fields. So that is how you can actually do that use case in Lightning. We have that back now. Hooray. One other thing I want to show you while I'm here is this right here. This on the right side, this is a relatively new Lightning component that got added in core called the accordion component. And when it first came out, I was like, well, I don't know where I'm going to use this. And then I had a brainwave one day, and I realized that I could put in this component multiple flows. Each of these is a flow. I just put one flow inside each of the little accordion tabs. Now the user can switch back and forth between those very quickly and easily, or just click this to collapse it all at once. So this way you're giving the user some control over what they see and what they don't see very quickly, one click, and they can switch between their various things that they're working with. Just another alternative. And these can be populated with predefined values just the same. Nope, I just skipped ahead. All right, another user case here. This is a quote. Quotes are attached to opportunities in Salesforce, right? And we'll say with this particular business use case that we have a workflow rule. This workflow rule is going to update the opportunity when the quote is marked as accepted, right? It's going to change the stage of that opportunity. But there's a problem. You guys remember the opportunity we were on before that had a validation rule, didn't it? It wouldn't let them proceed to the next stage unless they had the next steps filled in. Next steps aren't on this page, is it? So that's kind of a pain in the butt. Let's say you're in a mobile environment. Actually, let me show you what happens. I'll just go ahead and do this. So go ahead and try to mark it as accepted, and it fails. Right there. Little itty-bitty custom validation text, you must enter next steps to update the stage. What if you're in a mobile environment? What if you're on site talking to a client? All you have is a phone. And you're looking at your quote, and you're ready to mark it accepted because the client is ready. They've accepted. You got a handshake, and they're ready to go. But now I have to go back to my opportunity. I have to click edit. I have to put in the next steps. I have to hit save. Then I have to go back to my quote. That's a huge pain in the butt, especially when you're on mobile, and then you are at the mercy of your speeds and your coverage. That could take a long time when that client is sitting there. This is not a good situation. So how do we get around this? Let's take a look at how we would do this actually in a mobile environment. Down at the bottom, it's a little bit hard to see, but we have an action. This was added just the same. Same way, buttons, links, and actions, I added an action. And this one says next steps. This runs a flow when I click it. And all it's doing is asking me to put in next steps. And when I do so, what it is doing, it is going and pushing those next steps to the opportunity. I'm running it from the quote, but I don't have to leave the quote in order to access and update that opportunity data. And now, I can actually go ahead, set this to accepted, and voila, it works. All right. Next, we have the utility bar. The utility bar is something that doesn't see a lot of usage just yet, but it is available to everybody, every app, and by app, again, I mean the collection of tabs across the top of the page. It used to be Service Console only, but in Lightning, they've added it to everything now. And what it is basically a persistent bar at the bottom of the screen as long as you're in that app. I usually add these things to the bottom. You can have a recent items thing at the bottom so that no matter where you are, you can easily get to whatever last 10 items that you've been looking at, or notes, so you can get to your most recent notes that you've made. I generally just set that up in every org I'm working on because it gives you that ability to access those things from any place. To make a utility bar, to get a flow set up in a utility bar, you go to App Manager. That's different, right? Not App Builder, App Manager. And then once you edit your app, then you go to the utility bar selection on the left-hand side, and then you can add a flow. And then you just pick which flow you want to do. So let's take a look at this in action. So here I'm actually in a console. And down at the bottom, notice I have this bar. And look, time clock. Hey, that looks familiar. If I click on that, it runs the flow right away. And notice it remembered that I'm clocked in. It ran immediately as soon as I popped up that bar and was able to verify that that is the case. It didn't run until I popped up the bar. And I can just clock out from here just the same without having to go to a tab, without having to go anyplace else. I can get to it from any page. All right. So now let's talk about putting Lightning into Flow, right? And I don't mean this guy. That one's for the fans. It's more like this, because when we think of Lightning components, we think of, dragging those blocks onto the Lightning pages, right? We as, our Clicks Not Code developers, that's what we think about. But that's not actually the definition of a component, not really. If we look at a car, right, a car has many, many different pieces, like a tire. That is one component of the car. However, the wheel itself has lots of components in it as well. You have the rim. You have the actual tire itself. You have the little thing that you screw on to keep the air in. I don't know cars. All these things are also components, and they are critical. And they are, in the Lightning system, what we refer to as base Lightning components, right? They still go towards making Lightning components, but they cannot be broken down any further. And they are things like buttons, icons, drop-downs, paths, all those things. When you're making a Lightning page, if a coder is making Lightning page or a Lightning block or whatever they're doing, it's still called a Lightning component, but they're adding these base Lightning components to it in order to make that page, right? So, how do we do this in Flow? Well, the good news is, in Winter 19, this is Winter 19 release notes, there are some that are going to be added. We previously had one and one only, and that was the upload file. In Winter 19, there's a bunch more coming down the road, and a lot of them are pretty cool, like having the full name form without having to do anything like that, without having to make each individual field. You can have a URL field that actually does validation and says, hey, this isn't the URL. You can't go any further until it's a real URL. Things like that. So there's some pretty cool stuff. If, however, you want to be on the bleeding edge, you can go to lightningflow.net. This is a site that is actually run by Flow PM at Salesforce, right? And what they have done is added a number of custom created Lightning components created by them and by members of the community. And so what you can do is you can download and add these to your individual orgs to use as well. Now, caveat for that. If you have done this and you've put it into your org and you're using it in the Flow and you want to upgrade it, well, these are unmanaged packages. So now if we need to upgrade the component that we've just added to a new version, we actually have to go into the Flow, remove the component, save as a new version, delete the old version, uninstall the package, reinstall the package, open the Flow again, re-add the component, save again, activate. It can be a little bit tedious. So just be aware that that's the only way you're going to be able to do it. It is going to take you some time. That's why this is bleeding edge stuff. Eventually, I'm hoping many of these will make their way into core, but until they do, that's the price to pay. So let's take a look at some of these in action. So here's a flow over here on the right side, a little test flow, and notice there's one field there. But look at that field. It's a lookup, isn't it? There's a magnifying glass in it. That is an honest-to-God lookup in a flow, ladies and gentlemen. I know, right? I didn't make it, too. It's not for me. But this is game-changing, right? It's a big, big deal. So now that we have this, and it's got the autofill and everything. And see, it works just the same. There we go. So that is a big, big deal. Other Lightning components that we have. Let's go back to our quick op here. Actually, let's do this version. A little bit easier. All right, so we're putting in our information, right? Everything that's here. But this little product choice down here, this is actually, well, okay, let's say they don't have a product choice. Great. We click no. That's fine. If they do have a product choice, though, look at that. As soon as I clicked that, it popped up a new question based on the fact that I chose yes. And this is another Lightning component that lets you do this with some dependency. It's a little bit limited in what it can do. In Winter 19, they're adding a Lightning component that can do actual dependent pick lists based on your existing dependent pick list architecture. So that's really good stuff. But this is more of an architecture free. You can set it up however you want. So some pretty crazy stuff there. All right. Local actions. And it's not the kind of local action I'm talking about. I don't know if I'd buy that comic book. But it's a bit hard to actually show you what a local action is, so I'm just going to have to talk about it. A local action is something that runs in a flow and it interacts with your browser. And while that may not seem very interesting, keep in mind that if it can interact with your browser, it can access your URLs, your tabs, even anything that your browser can access. So if you have a database on a local intranet that can only be accessed under your VPN, Salesforce can't get to that, right? Salesforce is in the cloud. It can't get to what's behind your VPN. But theoretically, a coder could create a local action that uses JavaScript to go through your browser to access anything that you can get to through your browser. So you can get some pretty interesting stuff this way. That's pretty complicated. There's some more simpler things we can go to. Again, lightningflow.net has some examples of this. This is where I got the things I'm about to show you. And let's take a look. So actually, I'm going to click on back here. We're going to take a look at this again. I'm going to run this again, and I'd like you guys to watch very carefully what happens. Boom, up at the top. That right there, that's called a toast. And that's a local action that I've added to the flow. And what it does is it says, all right, here's a message based on what they've done. It's not like a big deal, but it's a little bit of validation that the user did something correctly. But I'm playing a little bit of a trick on you because it's not just the green flashy thing that I'm wanting you to look at. It's the fact that I actually use the flow to navigate to a page. We couldn't do that before, right? How many times have you wanted to create a record in a flow and then navigate immediately to that record and not been able to do it without making a Visualforce page, right? No Visualforce whatsoever involved in this. Is another local action. Remember, it's going through the browser, and it's just using the browser to go directly to the URL that I have specified, in this case, based on the variable of the account I'm going to, or I chose in the lookup, right? So now you can make stuff and go straight to it. Ah, so nice. So how does this look exactly in the flow? You may think, oh, this is going to be really, really complicated to create that kind of browser interaction. I say nay, nay. It is actually very simple. You can actually see on the left side here, we have local actions. And all you do is drag one out. This one is called OpenSObject. It's after my screen, you can see. So after the screen is done, then it's going to do this. And what it does is navigate to an ID, any ID. Doesn't matter what object it's from. All I have to do is put in an ID, and it will go there straight away. In this case, it's just the ID of the account that they chose. I have that stored in a variable, and then there we go. And the other one is the toast. It's also very simple. It's just a little thing that shows the toast. Again, it's after I go to the page, and a little bit of success message, and then I define a type. Success is the one that does green. You can put in failure, and that puts it in red with a, exclamation mark icon. So there's some control over that. All right, last we have guided engagement. This is really new. This came in summer 18, I believe. And what this is, it's designed for consoles. And if you've had anybody who's ever worked in a service desk capacity, or if you've worked in a service desk capacity, you know that sometimes when you're on the call with a client, you have to go here and talk to this person and find out this, and then I have to research this, and all of this just to get an answer for that client. Try and figure out what's going on, right? It can be a bit of, well, like this, trying to get exactly what you need, right? That doesn't make sense. So what do we do exactly? This is a case in the console, and you can see on the left-hand side we have this thing called guided action list. And each of these, actually, oops, I didn't remove those. Okay, so see here I have an add button, right? And if I click on the add button, what does it do? It pops up a list of flows. This is at the user level. I am not an admin doing this. This is a user who is able to see a list of the flows with screens. And from here they can say, all right, well, I need to get to this flow. And notice what it did. It opened that flow up in another tab alongside their work. You know what? I can do it again. And I can do it again. And all of these flows are all open simultaneously. The user can go back and forth between each of them as needed. And you know what? They can close the tab. And they can come back. And it's all still there. because that's what Service Console does. It remembers all your tabs that are open. So in this way, they can navigate back and forth. They can see what they need to see and help the client that much faster. So I believe that is pretty much it for what the examples I have for you today. The slides will be made available on the chatter group, so this will be for you. Clickable links, you can get to the trails. These are basically some flow trails. They do cover some of the stuff we've talked about today. But now we've got some time for some questions. So if anybody has a question, it'll be like supporting PBS, because you will earn a free tote bag. It says you're a Flownatic. Anybody have any questions today? Could you go to the mic? Sorry. That way the recording can hear you. The time clock, yeah. Not at this time. They have not added that to the roadmap yet, or that I'm aware of. Is that mic on in the middle? I can't hear anything. Maybe you just have to get closer. Sounds like it's on.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, I think I need to keep it holding. So my question is, what's the roadmap for having lookups on the flow?
I actually don't work for Salesforce,
Okay.
so I can't tell you that. I would wager sooner rather than later, but safe harbor.
For clarification, were those local actions, was that part of the managed package that need to be downloaded, or is that standard?
Unmanaged packages, yes, but yeah, you have to download them, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the flow that was on the record page, and it said next, and it was kind of embedded within the record page, if you clicked next, would you be able to stay on that record page and have it continue to show up in that same thing if you didn't need to navigate somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the navigation is something you have to add for that by adding that S-object local action.
Okay, so it can refresh within that, the next
Oh, yeah.
step.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
I mean, you might still have to refresh the page to see the results of your flow in the data, but yeah, you won't have to navigate out.
That was kind of my question. Is it possible to do some of these flow actions without having to do a refresh, or would you have to go to coding for that?
The thing about the refresh is that it's a kind of a flow truism right now across the board, whether it's local actions, whether it's normal data operations. Right now, it's just something you have to do. If your flow is running, you have to refresh in order to see whatever impacts that is coming. Actions and everything else. You know, if you're running a flow and it does a record update on the record you're looking at, it's not going to automatically refresh the page. And you won't see that record update until you do.
Cool, thanks.
You could call, that's right, I didn't think about that. You could run that OpenS object local action, and that you could say, go to the ID of the record I'm on already, and that would refresh the page. I didn't think about that. Thank you.
On the one example, you had a little flow in the corner that showed them what they needed to do, and there was no buttons on there. How did you? Because I haven't been able to get any flows without having to have like a button on there.
Okay. So when you are making a screen on a flow, you know, there's multiple tabs, right? There's a tab where you name your screen. There's a tab where you add the fields. That first tab, if you scroll down, there are options to control what buttons are shown on that screen. Just uncheck everything. No buttons will show up.
Okay, because I'll try that again. It usually gives me an error saying I need to have either the previous or next.
But it won't stop you.
Oh, okay.
It'll present a little warning, but it will still allow you to save it just fine.
Ah, okay, thank you.
For the local action that redirects to the object, is it possible to redirect to like app pages that aren't objects? Do you know? So, for example...
Good question. So right now it is entirely based upon that record ID. I have not tested it with, say, an admin field page or something like that. I have not personally tested that, so I don't know.
Okay. Thanks.
Sky's the limit as far as I know.
Hi, can you make like a pick list for flows that goes to another pick list for flows?
In the flow, no. There's that. I mean, that guided action list is essentially lets you have a choice of flows. I guess I'm not certain where it is you're asking exactly.
You have like a pick list and you can choose a flow, but can you combine a pick list and a flow in the same row? If you pick like Amsterdam and you want to do something else, but you don't want to use, like if you use like you have Amsterdam Irvine and you click Irvine and then you have like multiple options to run a flow or go on with another pick list.
Oh, so it's dependent?
Yeah.
That's what's coming in winter 19.
Oh, okay.
That's what's coming in winter 19. Okay, we have to clear out the room. I'll go ahead and head outside. So if anybody still has questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Spend whatever time you need. Thank you, everybody.